You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Hello? Is that the famous astronomer, Sir Patrick Moore?
It is, very much so.
Any news on the space front?
Quite so. Elon Musk has just designed and developed 5 gigantic, state-of-the-art rocket ships. All members of Parliament, along with the American Senate, have first-class tickets aboard them, you see. They're told they're going to the moon.
Told? Where exactly are they going, Sir Patrick?
The new anomaly discovered recently astronomically. A huge black hole.
Welcome to Twin Souls. Twin Souls is brought to you in association with the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Your host, Philip Kinsella. Now, I'm very delighted to have on board our show today Dr. Ian Rubenstein. Now, Dr. Rubenstein is the author of Consulting Spirit, A Doctor's Experience with Paranormal Mediumship, and he's appeared on national television and radio and featured in many national newspapers. And Ian is here today to talk about his work and his beliefs. Hello, Ian. How are you?
I'm fine, Philip, and it's a great honour to be on your show. It's lovely to be speaking to you.
Well, do you know, the honour's all ours because, you know, I've heard so much about you through the grapevine, as they say, and another good friend of mine, Neil Geddes Ward, put me in touch with you. And so I think a lot of the listeners would like to know a little bit about you, Ian, and of the work that you do, not just as a doctor, but also your paranormal beliefs and experiences.
It's hard to know where to begin. Well, first of all, I'm 65 years old, so I'm not a spring chicken. And I'm amazed I'm still in general practice. This was meant to be my year of winding down to retirement, but with the coronavirus crisis, it's like we've had, it's just been like in some sort of science fiction horror movie.
Yes.
So my other interest is IT. So there's been an awful lot of IT work I've been doing to help us work through the crisis, which has been interesting. Could have done without it though. It seems that I'm Britain's psychic GP. Now I have to say that I don't use my psychic gifts, such as they are, to diagnose. It's really actually mediumship. It's fairly classic mediumship. And to my great surprise, I seem to fall into the spiritualist camp because, to be honest, my first, I've always had an open mind for it.
Yeah.
I had quite a few odd experiences. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, so you were exposed to this in those days. Of course, the other thing I was exposed to was moon landings and space. So I'm also a space nut, where I get my UFO interests as well from. I think we might have something in common there.
Yes.
Maybe we can talk about that. But my real interest was actually UFOs. I have to say that's the thing I've always been passionately interested in. Especially with the news that's coming out lately. I'd never really thought of myself as being someone who'd get into spiritualism. I had a friend who I saw occasionally who was a spiritualist medium. Quite honestly, I thought he was nuts. So it's just ironic that I end up basically working within what I call the spiritualist paradigm. So I have to state here that I'm because of my scientific background, it's very difficult for me.
Yes.
It's difficult because I've been educated in a certain way, and I found it really hard to overcome that mindset. I'm still not sure I've overcome it. Not that I think it needs to be overcome, but I think you have to realize it's a way of thinking, and there are other ways of thinking.
Yes.
So I try not to do. I mean, obviously we all have beliefs, but I don't like the word belief. I'm always looking for evidence.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you there, Ian, because, I think we're on the same page. I mean, I was very much interested in UFOs, and it's still a great passion of mine. I'm talking about the theoretical aspects of the phenomenon.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I was brought into what we would call the spiritualist movement much later in my life. I always had an open mind, but of course, like you, it had to be categorically proven. And that is something that did occur to me. So what was it actually, Ian, that brought you into this psychic realm, this exploration of consciousness, the survival of consciousness?
Okay, so I suppose I have to tell. I mean, I've told this before in an interview, but it bears retelling because it's the most stunning experience of my life. So, the reason why I've kept an open mind, apart from having naturally an open mind, is that I witnessed a case of spontaneous transfiguration. My sister and I witnessed this when I was 19. And this was a friend. It's actually a friend's girlfriend. And one evening, she spontaneously transfigured before our eyes. And she had long dark hair, quite pretty looking. And we were at my friend's house one evening talking. It was just me, my sister, and my friend and his girlfriend. And suddenly the atmosphere went peculiar. And we're talking about summer 1974, so I was 19. And I was just in my first year of medical school. And so we were just sitting talking, and we all felt this change in the atmosphere, which is very odd. I mean, it was almost like the light had gone green. It was like a feeling rather than a colour. It's hard to explain. The atmosphere cleared, and then we were just talking, and all of a sudden, this girl I was looking at, she looked, there was someone else there. And there was a blonde-haired snow queen with these piercing blue eyes, a blonde, shortish blonde hair with a fringe, shoulder-length blonde hair with a fringe, and these most very strange, thick, white lips, which were curiously distorted, like they hadn't formed properly, coated with white frosted lipstick and high cheekbones. And I got what now you call it a download. But of course, in summer 1974, we didn't use those terms. It was like something had been plonked into my mind, and it was always, and it was like a message. It was, mark this, know there's more to life than meets the eye, and one day you will understand. And at the precise instant, my sister just started screaming at the top of her voice. And I turned to her, and she'd seen the same thing. She was hysterical.
Good Lord.
My friend and his girlfriend weren't aware of anything. So we piled into my dad's car. It was now late. And by the way, we never took any drugs or smoked anything wacky. I mean, we were straight up in. We weren't on anything like that. No alcohol, just coffee. Woke my parents up, and you can imagine what they said. They were crazy teenagers. So the next day, I phoned all my friends. My friend Steve said, well, I don't know what that was, but my next door neighbour's a spiritualist medium. He's called Keith Hudson. Why don't you come around and meet him? That was the first time I met Keith. And so, I mean, I met Keith, and he was about 9 years older than us, prematurely balding, odd guy, tall, thin, and had a handbook, the Spiritualist National Union handbook. And he said, oh, well, yes, this is what you saw was transfiguration. It's in the Bible. And I thought, okay, I'm not religious. He said, no, it was a spirit guide forming over her, and you saw it. Yeah. So I thought, I don't buy that, to be honest. But I couldn't work out what it was, because I thought it's more likely to be a hallucination. But how come my sister saw it? So if it's not a spirit guide, then it has to be a hallucination. If it's an hallucination, that means telepathy is real. So either way, as a medical student, I mean, remember, they were still, they just finished landing on the moon in those days. I was really heavily into science. Yeah. First year at university, just done my A-levels, all this sort of thing. I was thinking, well, I just had to park it to one side. Because I couldn't, it didn't fit into the standard accepted scientific worldview. So yes. That was that. I mean, obviously life went on. Occasionally patients would ask me, what do you think? Is there anything afterwards, Doc? And I once had a guy who was dying, and he said, what do you think, Doc? And I told him the story. And a couple of months later, his wife came to see me after he died and said, "Oh, that story you told him was very helpful because he thought that if you'd had this experience, then maybe there is something there." I remember when I was doing psychiatry as a GP trainee, I had a registrar, senior registrar, a more senior doctor than me, called Mike Revel, and he'd done missionary work in Africa. He was quite deeply religious. And I remember feeling uncomfortable because I was having to sort of section people under the Mental Health Act for having so-called hallucinations. And I remember saying to him, "Look, I've had I saw something that's inexplicable. How do I know these guys aren't seeing this?" And he gave me some very good advice. He said, "But Ian, in your case, what you witnessed enhanced your life. But in the case of our patients, they are diseased by it. In other words, they're ill at ease with their hallucinations. That's the difference." And that's actually a very, very useful rule of thumb. So yes, in my case, it was absolutely fascinating, and it's actually was something I used to tell the story at parties and things. So that's my seminal experience. And then, honestly, nothing really happened psychically for 27 years.
Wow.
I'd always tell this story. So it was 47 when it hit me. So we're talking about 2003. So, my wife was sick of the story. She'd heard it all. Every time I tell the story about this transfiguration, she'd roll her eyes. Not that she didn't, she does, but my wife's Hindu. And she believes much more than I do. These things are very accepted in Hinduism. Mm-hmm. So, but she's heard this story so many times. Anyway, so there I was, good Jewish boy, not religious, but from a Jewish family, and I had a problem with my Jewish mother, which a lot of Jewish boys have, and I finally made the break at the age of 47, and it was quite difficult, and so I was in a very difficult family situation. And I realised that my cousins had similar problems with their parents. Because I'm a GP and I'm into family therapy and that sort of thing, I've had a lot of experience helping other families. So I turned the spotlight on my family, and I realised that we'd all had the same trouble with our parents. And I thought it was down to my maternal grandfather, because he'd been a gambler. And he caused problems with my maternal grandmother. I'd never met them. They died before I was born. And I could see how this could cause a ripple effect in the family, because I'd seen certain recurring patterns. So, I interviewed all my uncles and aunts and managed to get a handle on it, and slowly managed to sort things out. So I'd been thinking about my grandfather, one I'd never met, in my mind for a long time. And I'm doing a surgery one day, and this is interesting. This was the July the 4th, 2003. My last patient in the morning was a guy called Keith Bishop. Now, Keith, he doesn't mind me using his name.
Right.
I'm using it, so I've had permission. Keith's a lovely guy. He used to be when I first met him, we were both very young. He's about 5 years younger than me. And he was a security guard at BBC Television Centre. And he had a pocketbook full of names. He was such a nice guy. He'd run errands for people and help people out. And eventually he had a list of names, and these people kept on phoning him up. So he actually formed a PR agency and has done very well. And I've known him, by that time I'd known him for 19 years. Mm-hmm. And so he was my last patient of the morning. And the thing about Keith is he's lovely, but he's a bit... Sometimes he forgets, so he gets busy and he misses his appointment. So I was waiting for him to turn up his 12 o'clock appointment, and I'm thinking, well, he's not going to come, is he? So I tried to get up out of my chair, and I couldn't. I felt something push me back down, so I tried again, couldn't. And then the phone rang, and it was Carol, my receptionist, saying, "Oh, Mr. Bishop's PA's just phoned me. He's at Southbury Station, which is literally 5 minutes from the surgery. He's a bit late. Can you hang around?" So yeah. I said, I will, but I won't. I can't hang around all day. So he came into my room red-faced and breathless and panting, which, bearing in mind, I had to take his blood pressure. That's not a good thing. So the thing about Keith is he's always got lovely showbiz stories to tell me, the latest gossip. So I let him sit down. I just thought, hang it, just get into the mood of this, because he's always good fun. And I was waiting for him to sort of calm down. And suddenly he looked at me and said, "I'm really sorry, Doc, but I've got this man here. He's the grandfather you never met, and he wants to speak to you." And my jaw hit the floor. I said, "What?" I said, you telling me you see spirits? He said, yeah. I said, how come you never told me before? I've known you for years. He said, well, it's not the sort of thing you tell your doctor normally because you think you're mad. And I thought, absolutely. So he said, now listen. He said, this guy's really anxious to speak to you. He's going to come through me. He's going to speak to you, but whatever he says, it's not me, it's him. So I said, okay, Keith, do your thing. And he then proceeded to tell me for 20 minutes everything, I kid you not, everything that had been going on in my family. And he wasn't in a trance, but he looked like he was sort of slightly out of it, like he was listening. I suppose you'd almost say it was a bit like overshadowing now, proper technical term, I suppose.
Yes.
And then he sort of came round and said, was that okay? I said, yeah. I said, that was amazing. He said, oh, by the way, my spirit guide, William. I said, what? What? Spirit guide? What the hell's going on? He said, my spirit guide, William. I said, who's William? He said, well, he used to be my boss at the BBC, and when he died, he became my spirit guide. I'm thinking, oh, my God, what's going on here? He said, he says you should be doing this. I said, doing what? He said, listening to spirit. I said, what? Then he stood up and said, I've got to go, Doc. He said, but they're telling me you're like a man on the edge of a cliff. And they're saying to me, don't be afraid to take a leap off that cliff. They'll catch you. And he left my room. And from that point on, Philip, then a series of weird events happened to me and my wife. And it was like I was being led along, a breadcrumb trail. So
yes,
odd coincidences, odd things happening.
Yeah,
I have to tell you, prior to this, I said my other interest was IT. I'd been writing a piece of software which was going to make my fortune. Ha ha! I'm a hobbyist programmer.
You never know.
I'd spent 9 years just concentrating on writing this software. And I actually think that was helpful because I think it enabled my conscious mind, my critical mind, to focus on something which was illogical, and allowed this other stuff to sort of creep round the back door, so to speak. Sort of got in by the back door. I mean, I'll tell you one of the things that happened. It was the one morning I had to do a visit on a patient, and they were just round the corner. So I threw my keys on the desk because I knew I wouldn't need my car. So my car keys put on the desk. And as I left the room, I felt a blow to the back of my neck. And I heard a voice saying, pick up your car keys or they'll get stolen. And I just laughed. This is bonkers. So I left, went to see the patient. When I came back, my receptionist, Anne, said, Ian, do you own a blue Corsa? She said, well, we just had to chase two boys out. We think they've run off and taken your key. And I said, I knew that was going to happen. And she said, why the bleeding hell didn't you listen to that voice then? I thought, well, I didn't.
Well, that's incredible.
It turned out that it gets even more crazy because so they taken stuff out of my car and I had to report it to the police. So I had to go across to the police station. When I'm in the police station, I tell the story to the guy who's a civilian police officer. When I get in there, it looked a bit odd. The last time I've been to the police station across the road, it was sort of quite a closed-in place, but they downgraded it. So the door was open and there weren't policemen. There was a civilian police guy sitting behind a desk. And on the walls were festooned pictures of spirit drawings, and there were 3 little Buddhas on a countertop. And I thought, what's going on here? And then the guy asked me my date of birth, and he looked at me and said, oh, you're a Leo like me. And I thought, why is he saying this? I'm in a police station. So I said, oh, are you into all this New Age stuff then? He said, yeah. He said, I'm a psychiatric nurse at the local hospital. I'm just doing this job just to earn some extra money. I'm doing a course in spirituality. So I said, oh, you'll be interested. I knew that my car keys were going to get stolen. So he banged his hand down his desk and said, we were meant to meet. And he undoes a drawer from his desk, opens a drawer from his desk, takes out a pack of cards. I said, what are they? He said, they're Indian medicine cards, Native American medicine cards. I'm going to give you a reading. So he gave me a reading in the police station.
Oh, my Lord.
And the question I asked was my software going to be successful? I didn't tell him what the question was. He said, you think of it. And he turned the card over and it said, the world is not yet ready. I thought, yeah, absolutely, the world's not ready. And as I left the police station, and I really thought that if I were to go back, that he wouldn't have been there and the police station would look entirely different. So I go back to the surgery and tell my receptionist what the weird stuff that happened to me. And they all start humming the Twilight Zone, because they heard. I mean, I had one weird story after another. The next day, I'm going to a family party, and I get speaking to someone who grew up in a haunted house. Which by this time it was like everywhere I went, I kept on bumping into this paranormal nonsense. So I remember saying to my wife, "Well, you speak to her. I can't deal with this." I went into the another part of the garden. As I go into that part of the garden, I meet my cousin Rose, and she's saying to a friend of hers, "I used to be a spiritual healer, but I had to give it up when the kids were born." So I just said to her, "Why am I what's happening?" She said, "Oh, it's quite simple, Ian. They want to work with you." I said, "Who?" She said, "The spirits." I mean, what do you mean the spirits want to work with me? She said, "Well, I believe that when you die, and if you're a doctor or a nurse or a healer, that the people on the other side will find someone who they think is amenable, and they'll try and make themselves known to you." I thought, well, this is nonsense, absolute nonsense. And actually, it was my wife who got me into training, because she'd noticed, and this again, maybe a couple of days later, she was looking in the local paper, and she saw that the local spiritualist church, which is in Enfield, is called the Beacon of Light, had a demonstration of clairvoyance by Keith Hudson, who was the guy who I'd spoken to 27 years before, when my friend's face had transfigured.
Good Lord.
And my wife had never met him, but she'd heard the name. She said, "Ian, is that the guy that you saw, with your friend's face?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, we'll have to go." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to a spiritualist church. They're crazy." She said, "No, we'll go." So I went, and I sat at the back, feeling very uncomfortable. And Keith Hudson was there, and he's a very good medium. He was going at a fast clip giving messages. And interestingly enough, when he first met me when I was a teenager, he said, "Ian, you've got a lot of knowledge around you. You don't know you know it, but you will one day." And I thought, well, he's bound to say that. I'm a medical student, just done my A-levels. Anybody could say that. And I'm sitting at the back of this hall, trying to hide myself. And he comes to me and says, "Sir," and I mean, because he didn't recognise me, I look entirely different, owing to the fact I've lost my hair. And he said to me, "Sir, you have a lot of knowledge around you. You don't know you know it, but you will very soon, and they're telling me you're going to be writing a book about it." And I thought, well, okay. I bet he says that to everybody. He doesn't actually. Anyway, so at the end of the service, I made myself known to him, and prior to that time, I'd been told by a patient of mine who I'd confided in that I was having these odd things. And this patient has said that what you really need is to sit in a circle, which I'd never heard of, a development circle. And when I'd asked him where they were, he said, "Well, they're in spiritualist churches." I said, "I'm not going to any bloody spiritualist church. No, they're all mad." But there I was in a spiritualist church. And then I asked, Keith said, I offered Keith a lift back to Walthamstow. I live in Enfield and he lives in Walthamstow, which is not far, but he doesn't drive. Mm-hmm. And when I took him back, he said, "Look, I serve Vestry Road Spiritualist Church. You don't have to be a spiritualist, but you're welcome to come to our open circle, see what you think." And as it was Keith, because, I was an old acquaintance, I thought, okay, I'll give it a go. So my first circle was, beginning of February 2004. And that's how I got into it.
Right. How amazing is that? And it's really incredible because as you're relaying this wonderful experiences of yours, we seem to share similar paths in many ways. I mean, I was always questioning and I wanted proof, and I couldn't accept the kind of like Victorian kind of process of this thing. But the further that we go into the exploration of consciousness, it appears that there is something incredible that starts to occur when we go down that rabbit hole.
Well, it's certainly a rabbit hole. I mean, there's no doubt about. I've gone I've gone down lots of different rabbit holes since then. I mean, it's. Yes, I mean, it's, as you say, of course, the more you go into it, the more you realise that it's not as. We have to have a framework.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'm very comfortable with the spiritualist framework. I mean, so you have to have a basis to work on, but I think that is. I mean, we certainly from this side, you can't you can't possibly grasp the immensity of it and the immensity of what we actually are.
Yeah, that's right. And I think from a humane level, Ian, I've always wanted to find, like most people, the holy grail of what happens to us. And I do believe, and I've always accepted the hypothesis, like Dr. Raymond Moody, you remind me so much of him because he wrote a lot of books on life after death and case studies of conscious survival beyond this realm. And I think the more that we link into this, I think the more that we open our minds, not gullibly, but we open our minds to it, I think we seem to draw in this new information rather like a mobile phone with a signal.
I think, I've got my theory of mediumship. One of my hypotheses is that actually we draw in an awful lot. When the more I think about my software, which was a program to basically organize doctors' rotas, I'd had something in my mind for years before I was actually given the task of organizing a doctor's rota. And it was like it was calling to me. Now, listen, I'm not artistic, but when people say the music calls them, it flows through them, I can honestly say the software used me as a medium. Not that it's been particularly successful, but it was a useful tool. And actually, interesting enough, what I learned from that has helped me over the years, because it's all part of my journey, which is probably too long to explain here. But looking at my life, I can see what the direction it's taken me in. And a lot of it is to do, it all gets mixed up with spirituality, spiritualism, consciousness. Of course, Rubenstein's first law of the paranormal is it always ends with aliens. Right. So whichever door, this is very important. I really want to coin that term. Rubenstein's first law of paranormal, whichever paranormal door you go through, you will always, mark my words, end up dealing with aliens. Cryptozoology, Bigfoot, you end up dealing with aliens. Spiritualism, you'll end up dealing with aliens. What came through the skull circle? UFO spaceships. You always end up dealing with aliens. So, one evening I ended up, one thing led to another, sitting in a chair in the middle of Rendlesham Forest with a couple of guys, one of them who thought that he was opening up an energy vortex, dodging MOD police. I never thought that my journey would take me to that. But I think you've done that, haven't you, Phil?
Yeah, well, I've been involved with so much. We're all important, but I've even teamed up with the original investigator, Brenda Butler, and we co-authored a book called Sky Crash Throughout Time. Really? But of course, that took a slating because people thought that it was about the Rendlesham UFO event that happened in 1980, but actually it was more of the cases that happened before and afterwards. And like you, it's interesting because, you're interested in the UFO phenomena the same as I am. I do clairvoyance, but I'm very wary with, I only ask for yes or no, and I deal with the facts that comes through. And I was known as the Judge Judy of mediumship, would you believe? Because I wouldn't have any nonsense, and I had to, calm down with it. But your journey is incredible. What do your peers think about your work with mediumship? And obviously, you work in scientific circles. How do they relate to this?
Very, very, very interesting. First of all, I'm very upfront about it. I remember, I don't know if you went through the Space Cadet phase. The bit where it all happens, you think, wow, you're going around a bit like, oh, what's happening? I believe that everybody goes through what I call Space Cadet, Earth calling Rubenstein, come back. Because when it happens, it's actually very discombobulating. It's interesting. If you actually go to the Jewish tradition of Kabbalah, the very religious Jews will not let you study Kabbalah unless you're a married man over the age of 40, because they say it's so you need to have your roots in the ground. And I can actually understand. I think once you deal with this, if you're not rooted, and I was very lucky, I was professionally rooted in a supported marriage, because I honestly think it can actually drive you nuts.
Oh.
I was fortunate to be guided by my wife and my patient. My patients were wonderful because I couldn't stop talking. I'm quite upfront. And I don't conceal things. I believe that what you see is what you get with me. And I couldn't conceal it. I couldn't stop talking about it. I remember going to a medical meeting, and I'd had one of my actually, I'd met my guide, which was really, the idea of spirit guides I found really uncomfortable. I mean, bonkers stuff.
Yes.
Who are these guys? Can they see me when I'm going to the toilet? What are they? I mean, all this stuff that you go through. And what's it like to be a guy hanging around someone all day? All these things. It's just medieval nonsense. But nonetheless, I was having experiences with guides that basically proved to me that they're real in some sense. I remember talking about this at a medical meeting, and my own GP came up to me, a lovely guy who's actually into this. He's very quiet. He's a Freemason. He said, Ian, I've actually seen angels, but I don't think you should be talking about this at medical meetings. People don't understand people like you and me. And you know what I thought? I thought, well, they're going to have to learn.
I do. It's the same. I mean, the people talk about these subjects, and you tend to, if you haven't had the experience, then of course most people will look at you as though you've just come out of that rabbit hole. But I can tell you that spirit guides are very real, because I was really very, very hard on the evidence that I was getting, and thankfully, like you, I dealt with an amazing medium who used to work for the FBI in America, and she slated the floor with me because she knew that I'd gone in there with a very not negative mind, but wanted to test her, and she knew straight away. So, but your spirit guide, I mean, this is interesting. I mean, now you understand from that perspective, Ian. I'm sure that there is a whole new paradigm of our understanding of what we call the spirit world. What's your idea about the spirit world? What do you suppose, Ian, that is? What do you think?
Well, you've got to think about reincarnation as well.
Yes.
And once you start talking about let's get back to basics. This is where it gets at. Look, let's start from fundamentals, which is we don't understand the nature of consciousness. Science does not have a clue. Not a clue, okay? And now we also don't understand the nature of time. I mean, we can measure it, but really science does not know the nature of time. We think we understand space, but Einstein tells us that space and time are the same thing. So if we don't understand time, we really don't understand space. So follow my logic here. We don't know who we are, we don't know where we are, and we don't know when we are, okay?
Yes, correct.
That consciousness, space, and time. Now, if I have a patient who doesn't know who they are, where they are, when they are, I say they're completely confused and possibly demented. So I start from the premise that really we're all confused and demented. So you have to tear up the whole rule book. And I think I'm coming around to the non-physicalist view that consciousness is primary. But of course, we do have episodes when we're unconscious. We think, don't we? So it can't be as easy as that. There's a guy, I don't know if you come across him, called Don Hoffman. He's a scientist, and his view of the universe, and this is very abstruse, and it's like talking about quantum physics when you're talking about tables. So his view of the universe is that he thinks that that there is nothing but conscious interacting intelligent entities, and that between them they create reality. So basically what we're seeing is an interface. It's a bit like when you on your computer and you move an icon across the computer, or you put something into a recycle bin. There's nothing actually in the computer that's doing it. It's just a simplified user interface for all the garbage that's going on behind. And he thinks that's the nature of reality. I'm getting more into that view, but that doesn't really help. And that's more of a deep philosophical thing. What do I think? I think the most useful thing is to stick to some sort of paradigm when you're working as a medium, and to keep things as simple as possible when you're giving messages to people. So, I don't. The other thing is, because I don't do belief, I think every time I give a message to a patient, because I'm not a platform medium. It happens when I'm in my surgery. When it happens, it doesn't happen every day. I think to some extent the message is useful for the patient because it helps, especially for bereavement counselling. But it's really useful for me because when they say, yeah, you're right, I think, really? Is that real? Because it sort of confirms for me. So I think I'm trying to prove it to myself. Because I think you never get over this sort of slightly skeptical thing. Once you've been through a science course, you are trained to be skeptical.
Yes.
So you're always trying to prove it to yourself, but you know you're never going to prove it because until it happens, until you cross over, you either know or you don't know. But my hypothesis is that this life is not all that there is, and that when time comes to pass over, you pretty much go to what the spiritualists would call a sort of summerland. I mean,
yes.
When I've been giving messages to people, I have people have often asked me what are they doing, and I've been shown pictures of what former patients or relatives of patients are doing, and they seem to be very busy over there. So I remember one of my patients, her husband unfortunately died of lung cancer. He was a heavy smoker, and I knew him, which obviously gives you. I mean, ideally you shouldn't know the person that's coming through, but so that's why I'm not the best medium in the world, because I couldn't do a platform medium and go up there. But I mean, some people could argue, well, if you knew the patient, then that poisons the whole thing.
Yes.
But I'll give you a few examples. But this guy showed me something, and what he was showing me was he was in a boat, and I could see that he was really enjoying himself, and he was rowing this boat across what looked like a shallow lagoon with lots of islands. I said, well, I don't know. I said, but she said, what do you think he's doing? I said, well, Paul's shown me to himself, and he's rowing this boat through some really lovely islands, a really blue sea. And she said, that's exactly what he wanted to do. And he was really miffed that he couldn't do it. He was planning on doing that. Wow. And I've had a few like that. I've had people basically in creative things and stuff like that. So I get the impression there's an active, if it's real, I'm not just deluding myself, but there's an active existence, and it seems to be, they tell me it's more real than our existence.
Yes, I will say to you, Ian, that, I have this I have had several experiences that tells me categorically that the other side is more real. I call it the awakening. Like you have your mobile phone. Excuse the very simple analogy here. You've got the mobile phone, which will act as the organic brain, and you have the signaling that comes through, and that everything, I believe, is being recorded from this life from birth to death. And when we pass over, we then take those experiences and the growth of those experiences back to what they call the one. And perhaps the one is learning more about itself through the creation of us, and that we thus expands the whole creation process. I mean, we've only got a theoretical platform, but one of the things I find really interesting is that you're correct. They do survive death, because a friend of mine, after I read a book by Dr. Raymond Moody about how to do it through mirrors, and I love that line with Agatha Christie's, they do it with mirrors. But anyway, I'd done this experiment, and a friend of mine who'd passed sadly with cancer, age 20, I asked him before he passed over if he would be able to show himself after he crossed over. And you know what, Ian? I swear to you, I came back from work and I sat in the kitchen where I am now, looking through to the conservatory glass doors, which, because it was winter and dark, the light creates kind of like a reflection upon the glass. And a young lad walked to the back of the house and turned to face me, and it was him. And there was no mental communication. It was just all visual, and I nearly died. I thought, my God, I bet he's having the laugh of his life, because I nearly fell off that damn chair, I can tell you. And I went out and I pulled the door back, and he'd disappeared like on Star Trek, because he said to me that he asked me before he died, well, how do you expect me to do that? And I said, well, I don't know, you'll find a way. And he said, I tell you what, I'll beam down like they do on Star Trek. Well, he didn't beam down, but he certainly beamed up wherever he went.
Yeah, there's always a sense of, it's interesting about the humour that comes through. I often find there's an intact sense of humour on the other side, Shelby.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I mean, without humor, you go mad. I mean, your work, though, is really pioneering, and not just because you're a learned gentleman, you're an esteemed scholar, but I think and feel it's absolutely wonderful that a soul from the scientific division has come forward to embrace most of the ideologies. I mean, of course, you have those that profess all this, but you get that in all walks of life. But your vision and your work is really quite astounding, and I think that people have to stand and and take note of what you're saying, because we need people like you, Ian. We need you.
The thing is, but if you look at the history of spiritualism, I'm not the first. There are a lot of doctors who've been in this over these, and I discovered recently. I was asked to review. Chapman, who brought through. There was a medium called Chapman who brought through a Dr. William Lang in the 1950s. Have you heard about this story?
No, I don't think
Dr.
I
William
have.
Lang was a consultant ophthalmologist, an eye doctor at Moorfields, and George Chapman was an Aylesbury fireman, I believe. And George Chapman got into mediumship, and he started channeling, and actually, was basically completely controlled by a spirit who said he was Dr. William Lang, and started doing healing. And he'd do psychic surgery, and he when he was entranced, he'd start clicking his fingers, and you'd hear a lot of finger clicking, and he'd be speaking to other spirits you couldn't see that were saying past this, past that, and apparently had some quite astounding cures. Well, so William Lang's daughter heard about this and was incensed, absolutely incensed, and booked a meeting to see George Chapman, entranced as her father, determined to sort of call him out.
Yeah.
And when she went into the room, she was absolutely amazed to find that it was her father.
Good Lord.
So she introduced George Chapman to his colleagues at Moorfields Eye Hospital. Now, I never heard this. This was just in the book that a guy called Roy Stemmen had given me to review. And it turned out that every week for 30 years, George Chapman met entranced as the former Dr. William Lang with his colleagues to instruct them about surgical techniques from the other side. These were really esteemed ophthalmologists. One of them was a guy called Patrick Trevor Roper. Now, all medical students from my vintage know the name because he wrote the book Lecture Notes in Ophthalmology. And this happened for years. And I thought, well, it would have been really nice if they'd have come out and said this is what they were doing. So I don't think I'm particularly pioneering in that respect. I think what I've got is a big mouth.
No. Do you know, but I think it's really interesting, Ian, because, your book, Consulting Spirit, A Doctor's Experience with Practical Mediumship, and I love the way that you look at this in not a clinical way, but a kind of like open-minded. I'm very much the same as yourself. I mean, I'm not as learned as you are, but I can tell you that, the experiences and the things that have happened to you, kind of like, although they're different, they mirror mine. And that is absolutely fascinating.
That's why I wrote it. The reason why I wrote it was I really, really had to keep notes. Well, first of all, when we were in Circle with Keith, the way we used to give messages was quite interesting. And we used to have to keep a note of our messages. So I had a notebook. I transferred it to a Microsoft Word document. And I thought, well, I've got all these things here. Let's pad out with what was happening in my life at the time, because I don't normally keep a diary. And I found that as I wrote these things down, I managed to sort of square it in my mind a bit more easily. I managed to sort of get it out of my head and put it down on paper. It felt easier. So it was when I had a minor accident on my bike and broke my kneecap in 2007. And I wondered what to do. And I remember the night before, well, I kept on meeting mediums. And they kept on saying, they're telling me you're going to be writing a book. And the night before I broke my knee, one woman I met, she said, they're telling me you're going to be writing a book very soon now. So I was sat at home with my leg propped up, and I was thinking, you know what, I better get cracking on this book in case they send the boys around to break the other knee. So I did. So it's really just a collection of my notes, which I managed to flesh out. Was getting it published was the devil of a time. And eventually I was all set to hit self-publish on Amazon. And then I realized there's an awful lot of people on the other side of the Atlantic who speak English. So I actually approached the Anomalist books. The Anomalist magazine is like 14 times over here. And they took it up, which has been very good. So then I had to rewrite the book in American English, which is an American book. So what you've got is an American book written by an English doctor about English things, but written in American English, which was really very odd. So when you read it, it's a bit odd. But I mean, hats off. The Americans wanted to publish it, so I'm not going to worry about that. But I mean, so I remember I was GPs have to be appraised. I mean, every year we have to sit down and talk about what we've done at work and where we think we're going. And I was very lucky to have an appraiser who's a very nice guy. And I told him, about what I was doing and how this stuff was spinning over into my professional life. And instead of him saying this is nonsense, he said, "Oh no, I think this is quite useful, and I think this is something worth exploring." So when you ask me what sort of reception I've had, I've been very fortunate. Really fortunate. I haven't come across anything negative. I mean, I suppose if I was ramming it down people's throats and saying this is what you've got to believe, that would be a different matter. But when it happens, it just happens.
So are you going to be working on another... Sorry to interrupt you there, Ian. I've got to ask this question of you because I've been asked by my brother as well. Are you going to be working on another book, sir? Is there another book in the making at all?
Well, there was, but then with the COVID-19 thing, I mean, nothing. I mean, I made a few notes. I mean, the big problem is do I just write more of the same? Or do I talk more about philosophy? Because I think if I go about the philosophy, I'll lose a lot of people because it gets a bit very difficult to follow. So I think I'd like to, my fantasy is that I write something which explains how useful it is, and then it gets taken up to the doctors. But I don't see that happening. I mean, it's I just want people to know that this is useful, particularly in the field of bereavement counselling.
Yeah, definitely. And, I also feel it's very important because, a lot of people out there, when they come, they come and see me, they consult with me. I'm not an expert. They always ask me, are they okay now they've crossed over? And I always say to them, well, they never seem to complain. Absolutely. I mean, they're no longer afflicted by the illnesses which took them. But I couldn't tell you what they were doing. But all I can tell you, Ian, I'm as honest as you are. I mean, the experience that I had many years ago and was showed me that the world on the other side is more real, more tangible. It's almost as if it's like falling in love. Really falling in love for the first time. But then I do joke with people and I say to them, well, we must have all been drunk on the other side. Come down to earth, my goodness. But you joking?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, this idea that we're a single soul that goes from life to life, I don't think it's as simple as that. I mean, I think you're a much greater being and you send a portion of your energy down.
Yes.
So when you say, I mean, I knew the name of my wife before I met her. And I absolutely, when I was 16, I remember walking down the stairs at my house and being told I was going to marry an Indian girl with a name like Pam. And I remember thinking, this is crazy. I don't know any Indian girls. And I had a crush on another girl at school and I wanted to marry her. And when I went to medical school, I met the girl who's going to be my wife. Her name is Poonam, Punam. If you take the U and the N out, you've got Pam and she's Indian. Now, it wasn't until I started going out with her that I realized she was Indian, which doesn't look particularly Indian. So these things are very important. I mean, a lot of people say that's just a coincidence. No, I don't think so. I think that was vouchsafed to me. So I think to some extent we either plan or our life is ordained in some way. And I think it all comes down to the nature of time. You see, I think when we're here, we're in time. But I think when we're on the other side, we're also in a bit of time. It's not the same time. And I think ultimately there is no such thing as time. We're just part of whatever the universal intelligence is. And we are a co-creating bit of it. Yeah. And it all happens at once. And it all sort of interacts instantly and explains lots of, that's not much of an explanation, but I see it as some sort of universal cosmic spasm of creativity, which we're all involved with.
Yes.
So we get these odd linkages across time because time and space is irrelevant from over there. It's just when we're here, time and space pops into existence.
That's interesting.
That's a bit sort of esoteric, really. But
you've got to throw a little bit of that in there, Ian.
Yeah. So why do we come here? I mean, I think because I see people in distress every day.
Yeah.
Not just physical illness, but with all sorts of emotional things. And the more I see this, the more I think that there is genuinely a reason for our existence. And I think if you want to sort of talk in modern terms, it's about balancing inharmonious energies. And I think we come here with or as, I still haven't worked out whether we are energy or whether we can hold energy, a bundle of inharmonious or partially harmonized energies. And our job where we're here is to try and work through our life and harmonize the energies, get to know them. It's almost like we're in a sandbox where you can't do much harm. And yes. I don't know if you've noticed, but when you get into this, when you get a bit more knowledge, things happen to you much more quickly. So if I have an uncharitable thought about someone, it always hits me back in the face.
Yes.
It happens very quickly. And I've noticed that as I progress along what I would call this spiritual pathway, it happens faster and faster. And it occurred to me, and of course, when you're young, you can do something wrong. The consequences don't hit you immediately. And it just occurs to me that actually, in the real reality, the greater reality, everything happens instantly. And you've got and if you were to be dropped into that as an inexperienced soul, it'd be like giving a kid a nuclear bomb. Whereas here, things happen more slowly. You still get the consequences, but you've got time to see them play out, time to observe them, and then to learn from them. So we're slowed down here. That's why things happen more slowly. And as you get more experience, so things happen more quickly. So that makes sense. That's one of the other things. So that's what I mean. I have this discussion with my patients when they ask me what it's all about. I mean, obviously, I think I can go a bit off half-cocked, and sometimes their eyes glaze over. But hey-ho, there you go.
Do you know, I tell you also, it's interesting because your idea, and I also accept and embrace the ideology of what we call reincarnation. And I think that is a choice that we take or we make. And also, just going back very quickly before I forget, I love the idea that you have that you've said that a small part of our souls comes down here, because that fascinates me. I think that, that perhaps we're not kind of asleep, but unaware until we return back from the journey, like a deep sea diver, or a spaceman going into the beyond the stratosphere of the Earth. That's interesting.
Well, I think you have to, look, when we talk about reincarnation, we've got to be very clear what we're talking about. First of all, re implies time. So if time, and the minute you get into consciousness and paranormal stuff, you know that time is very, very flexible, and may not even exist as we know it. Very early on in my journey, my guide, and I'm absolutely certain this was given to me. I had this image in my mind of a huge diamond, multifaceted diamond. And it was explained to me, how was it explained to me, in my sort of all at once in my head, that you are but one facet of a multifaceted diamond, and each facet represents the life. And it's life and space and time, and everybody you meet in it is that one facet. And also the afterlife also is that one facet. But gradually, as you progress, you begin to realize that you are composed of other facets, which are actually other lives. So if you have that image in your mind, then imagine rays of light, or light being energy, passing through each different facet and then bending and being refracted. Your job in one life is to sort of balance or refract or make complete changes that are rays of light that pass through other facets.
Wow!
And therefore, that is the purpose of reincarnation. So it's not a matter of it's a matter of you are actually a multifaceted being. And that as in a timeless state, all your lives actually exist at once. So this idea of being a young soul or an old soul, it makes sense when you're over here, but it makes no sense in terms of the universe, because everything just is.
Yes, that's interesting.
It's very, very hard to have that concept. So if we take it further, you can imagine that there would be some leakage in between the different facets, and particularly if maybe one facet was working on a whole bundle of light rays or energy that had already been worked on another facet, you might then expect there to be more linkage and maybe more memories. So then you might say, I recall that past life. Oh, I've got stuff from a future life. It's not actually you as a different individual. It's a different part of you. So I think the idea of you going from one life to another in a serial way is simplicity. I don't know if you've ever heard of F.W.H. Myers. He was one of the founders of this Society for Psychical Research. He was one of the Cambridge scholars. He actually, I think he came back through the Leslie Flint recordings. Have you ever heard of Leslie Flint?
Yes, I have. Yes, definitely I have. Yes.
I think maybe I'm wrong, but you can listen to them on the internet. And he says that. Well, maybe I read this in Michael Tim's blog, but basically he said, look, reincarnation as popularly thought is actually wrong. He said, I as Myers will never exist again on Earth, but I have set the seeds for another one who will continue, another person of my soul group, he called it, that will come and continue the work. Silver Birch, who I've got a lot of time for. I don't know if you've read a lot of Silver Birch.
Oh, yes, I've read the material, yes.
Yeah, well, Silver Birch talks about them. I mean, this is what, I mean, I had this image in my mind. Then I read Silver Birch. I thought, my God, was it Silver Birch who gave it to him? Because he uses the very same term as, yes, reincarnation is real, but it's not as you think, and often a half-truth is worse than a falsehood. So I mean, basically, you just have to accept the fact that you can't see the whole picture when you're here.
And it's amazing as well. Sorry, Ian, it's incredible. I mean, I think most people fear no longer being themselves. I think they fear of being their consciousness being obliterated, that there is no more identity of self. But I find great comfort, and I think people, good souls, learned men like you and many other individuals are on this journey. And of course, when we change from the wheel that we've been caught in of practicality and normality, and I think that on a soul level, perhaps we are making our calling, as it were. Perhaps we are evolving on a very low level of conscious awareness and trying to aspire upwards, Yeah,
but I mean, on a practical level, of course, so, I mean, this is lovely. I love these discussions. I could talk about this all day, but on a practical level, of course, the way I use my mediumship is to comfort my patients, really.
Yes.
In fact, so now of course, when I first started, I actually thought I was going to be struck off. I mean, doctors giving messages to patients, that's it, my career's over. But something just compelled me to go on with it, because it was so, every time I gave a message to a patient, it was so healing. It was and the atmosphere changed completely. And so, because what I didn't realize is that my patients accepted this a lot more than, I mean, my colleagues were okay. Look, imagine you're a doctor in a busy surgery. You're one of maybe 5 or 6 partners, busy firm, doing serious work. Then one of them starts saying, hey, listen, I think I'm getting messages from dead people. What are you going to think? I mean, honestly, luckily I've got the most lovely partners. And they said, as long as you're doing the job, you're fine. Just, you seem to have your feet on the ground. So that was nice. But when word got around that I was giving messages very tentatively at first to patients, the patients were a lot more accepting of it. And I said, oh, yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's great. And I said, well, I'm not sure I believe this. And they look at me saying, what do you mean you don't believe it? You just gave me the message. I said, well, I mean, it could be this, could be that. For God's sake, Doc, get over it. You gave us a message. That's fine. That's all I want to know.
I think it's amazing. I have seen you on television before, because I recognized you, Ian, and I said, I've seen this guy on TV and I have read about you and your work. And when you're on one of the shows, Paranormal Peep Show with Neil, a good friend of mine, he said, you got to have Ian on your show. And then, of course, my brother got in touch with you, and then you kindly agreed to take your time up for our show. So it's one of those things, I think, where things interconnect for certain reasons. And although sometimes we cannot see the reasoning behind that, I think that inspiration and that creativity process and that belief in self and other people is so vitally important on our journey. And you know that, because your work's, it's very brilliant.
Well, I don't know about brilliant, but I've had some. I mean, can I tell you about some of the messages I've given that have been?
Please do, Ian.
Okay,
go ahead.
Well, okay, so I won't tell the ones I told before. One that sticks to mind. So I've got this lady. She's a dinner lady, and she came to see me, and I suddenly realised, and she knows by this time all my patients know I do this. It's just something. Yeah, this is what Ian does. It's fine.
Yeah.
So I said, I seemed speaking to her, and we were talking about her medical thing, and I suddenly said, Penny, I want to talk about milk tokens. She said, what do you mean milk tokens? I said, I don't know. These are flat things to do with milk. Let me think. I thought, are you collecting milk bottle tops? She said, the old, like, Blue Peter style, aluminium.
Yeah.
She said, yeah, but they're not those. They're plastic tops. I said, really? She said, yeah. I said, hang on a minute. Then I said, I've got a lollipop lady. Can you take a lollipop lady? She said, yes, I can. I thought, okay, so I had an image of a lollipop there. And then I said, well, I've got this woman here who's not the lollipop lady, but she tells me that she's someone she's deceased recently, and she's putting a red ribbon around your neck, and on it is a medal. And I said, stand up. She wants me to give you a kiss on your forehead. So I gave her a kiss on the forehead. She said, she's calling you a star. And Penny just burst into tears. I said, what's up? She said, and I actually got it recorded on my phone because it places a picture. She said, how you couldn't possibly know that? How could you know that? How could you know that? I said, well, what's up? And this is the story. She had a friend at school, a teacher in her 70s who died suddenly. And this teacher used to sort of call her a star. That's what she used to call her. Actually, used to call her a diamond. Sorry, a star. The teacher had a daughter who was a lollipop lady, a school crossing guard, and the lollipop lady's son was a disabled lad in a wheelchair, and he lived in a wheelchair. And the wheelchair firm said that if they collected the weight of milk bottle tops, that was the same as the wheelchair, they'd give him a new wheelchair. And Penny just that day got the last milk bottle top. And,
wow!
And that was just at the right moment. And I mean, that was just incredible. I mean, amazing. Where did that come from? I mean, I don't know. It felt like this woman was there and basically the woman was thanking her.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's so heartwarming.
That's amazing. And so that was one. And one that's happened that was maybe a couple of years ago now. One that's happened more recently was a guy called Vic. Again, Vic doesn't mind me using his name. In fact, he's quite adamant. He wants people to know about this. So I had this guy. He had this cough. It wouldn't go away. It was getting worse and worse and worse. He'd seen me. He'd seen my partners at the surgery. Every time he tried to talk, he started coughing. He was having choking fits. And we thought he had cancer or something. We sent him off to see respiratory physicians. He had tubes down his lungs, tubes down his throat. He had CT scans. Everything turned out to be okay. Came back to see me, and I was dreading seeing him because I knew he still had his symptoms, and I had nothing to give him. So I looked at him, and I said, Vic, we haven't found anything. And he just started to cry. Then I suddenly thought, Vic, you've had this for a year. Did anything happen that this started? Any tragedies or traumas? He said, no. Then I said, did anyone die? He said, yeah, my brother-in-law, Ken, died. So I said, would you like me to see if I can pick up anything about Ken? Because I didn't know about this guy. Because I knew that he was quite amenable to this. So he said, yeah. So I was seeing a row of miniature whiskey bottles. And then I was in a workshop with manuals and machines. And I just knew that this guy collected whiskey miniatures and that he didn't read, but the only thing he read was technical manuals. And he had a very odd workshop. And then I could see this field with flags and a ditch around it. And Vic's eyes just widened. And he started saying, I know exactly what you're talking about. So at the end of it, I said, well, don't tell me, because don't feed the medium.
Yes.
At the end of it, I said, okay, I've finished now. I've got nothing else. What was that about? And he said, well, Ken used to collect whiskey miniature bottles. I actually described the pub he went to. I said, what was the workshop? He said, he makes, I never heard of these heart spoons. These are large spoon-like objects used for extracting the hearts for heart transplants. He manufactured them himself, and the only thing he ever read was workshop manuals. And I said, well, what about this field with the flags? And he said, well, you couldn't possibly know that. We scattered his ashes on his golf course.
Oh my
And
God.
that's what the little flags were, you see.
Yeah.
And he said, and that ditch you described is exactly where that was. So I said, well, that's amazing. I said, look, I don't know if he was there or not. He said, Ian, he said, I'm convinced. He said, you say what you want. That was Ken. So, okay. So he then left my room, smiling, came back a month later to see me, maybe a couple of weeks, can't remember. And I said, how are you doing, Ken? I was dreading seeing him. I thought, well, he's going to be suffering. He said, I'm cured. I said, what do you mean you're cured? He said, the minute you gave me that message, I started feeling better. He said, after 3 days, my cough had gone. And I can tell you this, I saw him just before lockdown. He said it's been fine since.
Oh, blimey, that's amazing.
Now, was it telepathic? Obviously there was something paranormal going on, so I didn't know any of this stuff. But, I mean, was it? You could say, well, maybe it's just the realization what was causing it. Sometimes the realization of what was causing a trauma can just release it. I mean, that's what in psychotherapy. But the information was pretty bloody accurate.
Absolutely outstanding, Ian. And, that is incredible.
So let's talk about lockdown. So I was giving readings to one of my patients who lost her mum. And that was just before lockdown. And the circle I go to, because I'm still in the development circle, we met every week at someone's house, but we moved to Zoom. And I thought, well, how are we going to do this? And I've heard that you can do readings over the phone or via video, and why not? If space and time is just theoretical, why not? But it wasn't really my thing, because I'm quite a people person. But I realised that actually you can give decent messages, actually sometimes better messages over video, because you haven't got the body language cues. Sometimes you watch, you can't help but do a bit of cold reading, because you're queued up. You think, oh, did I say that right? You see them fidget or something. Well, you're one step removed, so you've got more of a purer reading that way. Mm-hmm. So I had a telephone consultation with my patient next day, and she said, oh, I was really hoping to see you in person, but I understand why we can't. Because I was really looking forward to some more evidence. So I said, well, we could try Zoom. So we did, and it's been wonderful. I mean, I've given us some fantastic evidence, which is pretty good. I mean, got her mother through, her husband's brother came through. I mean, I know nothing about her family, all sorts of stuff. She's found it really helpful. The best one was, because I'm saying it's not to prove that I'm good, because I'm not. I mean, like all mediums, you're only as good as your last reading.
Yes, that's right.
It's the good ones that get you through the duds. But so I saw in my head a handbag. I said to her, I'm seeing this handbag. She said, oh, I think Mum may have had a handbag. I don't know. I said, well, she wants you to open it. So I said, okay. She said, I'll look for a handbag and see it, and when I find it, I'll open it. Then I thought, okay, when that image went, then I saw a long chain. I thought it was actually like a charm bracelet, but it was longer. I said, I've got this thing like a charm bracelet that's very long. She said, oh, I know what that is. That's Mum's charm bracelet. And the good thing about doing Zoom readings is, of course, they're at home and they can find the object you've seen. So she rummages around and takes out this long chain. I'd never heard of a charm necklace, but that's what it was. And on it were charms. I said, well, look at the charm. Is there anything on the charm to do with a handbag? So she looks at the charms. One of them's a handbag.
Wow.
I said, does it open? She says, I don't know. I said, well, I think your mum wants you to open it. So it did open. And inside it was a little silver plaque which said, I love you on it.
Oh.
And that was, I mean, honestly, that was so touching.
That's incredible. And, I think that brings a lot of comfort to those. And I think, practically speaking, this, this whole, because this operates on a non-physical frequency that can't be touched or, caught. I think people tend to disbelieve unless they don't see it. But of course, this information, I always say to people, it's like a signal on a mobile phone. You just take it for granted that it's there, but it would appear like magic to a caveman if you gave it to him. Yeah. And I think that, consciousness operates on this frequency. We are coming to the end of the show now, Ian, but I just want to ask a question first of all. I know that our listeners will be absolutely fascinated with your documentaries and with your book, Consulting Spirit, a Doctor's Experience with Practical Mediumship. And I urge all of the listeners to go and get that book. And you can see a scientist's version of how he's dealt with it, how Dr. Ian Rubenstein has dealt with this. But how can people get hold of you, Ian? How can they get hold of you?
There's an email on my website. The big problem with these, it's got a form on it. The big problem, I'm getting a lot of spam. I don't know how they do these spam bots that spam, but there is a way. If you go onto my website, if you start to type in, it's drianrubenstein.com. There's a email there.
Okay, and your book is Consulting Spirit, the Doctor's Experience.
Yeah, that's on Amazon, Kindle or physical copy. And the idea is all royalties such as they are, as you know, you don't make anything out of books. Whatever royalties I get, I donate to cancer charities, because if you read the book, you realise that there's a theme of dealing with patients with cancer. And actually, when that book's over, it goes even more, because I ended up actually working to transform the way cancer services are delivered in London. But that's part of the journey, but not part of this story.
Oh.
So the journey continues.
Well, we wish you much luck, Ian, and a fascinating conversation. I mean, you've given me a lot to think about, and of course, I'll go away and absorb all that wonderful information, especially your views on the other side and of reincarnation and those aspects. I mean, we're always forever learning. We never stop learning. We can only carry on, and other souls like yourself help fuel us with that energy, that passion, that drive, that mystery. We need a little bit of mystery, a little bit of suspense as well, and magic. I think that's so important.
Oh, absolutely.
But thank you so much, Ian, for coming on board the show. It's been an absolute delight.
You're welcome, Philip.
And we'd like you back on again at some point to see how you're doing, which would be wonderful.
Oh, that'd be nice, but who knows? I mean, the way the world's gone crazy at the moment, so I just don't know. But it's all in the gift of the gods, I suppose. You just have to see which way to go.
In the lap of the gods, the great gods of Olympus. And thank you. Our thanks go to Dr. Ian Rubenstein, author of Consulting Spirit, a Doctor's Experience with Practical Mediumship. Go and buy the book and donate some money to cancer, because that's where it's going. And all it remains for me to say is thank you so much for tuning in. And I want to thank our esteemed guest, Dr. Rubenstein, for his valuable time. And stay safe and watch the skies. And you've been listening to Twin Souls in association with the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Stay safe and well. God bless.